All right. So we're going to have a little discussion on civics. Try to make it as easy as possible. Okay? So I was watching a video from Ring of Fire that went to go ahead and explain the factor that with for people to remember that with the Jeffrey Epstein associates list coming out, we cannot assume automatically that everybody on that list is, sexual predators. All right? Now, ultimately, as much as, you know, public interest and, everyone's hype because of how long it took to be able to get the list made public, there are going to be a lot of people that are going to want to jump the gun on that. All right? But gotta explain about the way the due process works. All right? Ultimately, there is a process when it comes down to, because of the factor of people, whether willingly or, unknowingly, not understanding the difference between persecution and prosecution. All right? So starting a public harassment campaign, that right there would be considered persecution. All right? Now, one thing to understand, a lot of the times when people go ahead and rely on public persecution, the reason why is because ultimately, with circumstances that happen, there is a lot of factors that ends up preventing from actual prosecution. Okay? Like, for example, if everything that everyone wanted to feel was not morally, stand up, would be deemed illegal, then ultimately there would be nobody that would be free whatsoever. All right? So, let's use the circumstances of my past as an example. All right? When I was a teenager, when I was in my early teens, all right, I had ended up, stealing some stuff, as far as, ordering some stuff online. And the fucked up thing is, I pretty much ended up having to go ahead and hand it over to schoolmates to pretty much pay protection money. All right? Now, the school later on did end up finding that, and, they were trying really hard to try to avoid any type of culpability in that situation. But I ended up having to go ahead and, deal with getting put on probation. I was court ordered to a group home, which I did my probation time. I had done my time at that group home. But then later on, there was a screw up that ended up happening with the Department of Justice. All right? Federal law dictates the factor that somebody with a juvenile record, that the circumstances of that juvenile record after paying their debt to society, that those, records end up going ahead and needing to be suppressed and sealed. And none of that can be used as evidence of a pattern of behavior to dictate future behavior. All right? So that being said, that is what ended up being done to me. All right? Later on. So, with that going ahead and being done to me later on, ended up locked up 6 months on 120-day max, where somebody ended up also trying to starve me to death and kill me. Now, keep in mind, all this ended up snowballing just because of the fact that when I was a teenager, I ended up, stealing. All right? But because of that, when I ended up getting locked up, and I ended up being released on a no contest, which is neither the admission of innocence or guilt. All right. And I did not get to go ahead and choose otherwise. Literally, my lawyer spoke up for me. I don't even think he actually ended up paying attention to what was going on, but I had explained to him the factor that they got the details wrong. Now, before I ended up going ahead and ending up in there, ultimately, the judge did not give me the opportunity to be able to even submit a innocent or, a guilty or a not guilty plea. All right? So, that right there, that ends up equating to judicial misconduct. All right? Now, when I ended up getting the handcuffs thrown on me, I wasn't read my Miranda rights. If anything, I even asked the officer, well, if you're throwing me in cuffs and everything, aren't you supposed to read me my Miranda rights? And his snarky, sarcastic response is, what do you think this is, cops? So that right there, that actually ended up predating too, the ruling of law enforcement not needing to read you your Miranda rights, in the process of detaining you. All right? So, those right there, numerous different screw-ups. But, ultimately, once that whole thing was done, understand, anything that happened from that point beforehand, all right, would not be able to go ahead and be presented in future, all right? Meaning, ultimately, you can't go ahead and end up, being tried and prosecuted and everything for something that happened before you had paid your debt to society, all right? Now, when you have public interest that basically feels like, no, I don't feel that things should have gone in this manner. It doesn't matter what you feel that they should have gone. What matters is due process, all right? Because ultimately, if you have public opinion trying to turn a case into a high public interest case to go ahead and try to sway a verdict in one direction or another, that right there not only could end up going ahead and getting the person off the hook from having to face accountability for whatever crimes that they did end up going ahead and committing, if the actual threshold was met of having enough evidence to be able to prove it's not only said crimes ended up happening, but that ultimately the person ended up having motive and intent of being able to commit those crimes. But also having a cognitive understanding of what they were doing. Because ultimately, also, if somebody ended up unknowingly committing a crime because of the fact that they did not know that said action was against the law, or that there was a law saying that said action, and we're not talking about town or local ordinance, we're talking federal law. Ultimately, that right there ends up going ahead and removing their capability of having motive, because you didn't know that what you were doing was a crime. All right, so ultimately, despite the factor of ignorance of the law, not, like not being an excuse for going ahead and breaking the law, that doesn't mean the factor that there is no form of accountability in any way, shape, or form. All right. But ultimately, the problems that can end up happening with trying to breach somebody's due process. All right. You could end up going ahead and causing them to have grounds of being able to get a plea of ineffective counsel because of, the legal representation that was supposed to be granted to them, refused to recuse themselves because of, personal interest. Like, for example, a financial stake, of the determination of said outcome. Or, for example, like if you end up going ahead and being appointed a lawyer that ultimately goes to represent you against a civil lawsuit against Walmart, because of a personal injury, but at the same time, said lawyer happens to, have an investment portfolio with stocks from said Walmart, then ultimately that right there and the unwillingness to disclose that information could end up leading to, the person being able to get off on, ineffective counsel defense, while at the same time too, such details being omitted could end up leading to a mistrial. All right. So ultimately, unless you fully understand, the factor of number one, presumption of innocence needing to be maintained. Number two, full disclosure of any personal implicit bias that may end up being held by counsel, whether it be, the counsel of the plaintiff or the counsel for the defendant. Any information of that being omitted, or, for example, any type of familial ties or any type of business ties could end up going ahead and causing a case to fall apart, whether criminal or civil. So, with those factors kept in mind, like Farron Cousins said, as much as we don't want to have to go ahead and say it, with the Jeffrey Epstein list, associates list, coming out and being unsealed, we cannot assume that everybody on that list is a predator. He said we could assume that they're in some way or another, scumbags, like they're a shitty person in some form or another, or they, at least had a bad taste in, who they choose to surround themselves with. But you can't go ahead and give accusations based on that. Things may, because there's something called the illusion of impropriety. And most people end up confusing the illusion of impropriety with, actual impropriety. This doesn't look good, But anyway, the point being made on that is, you said that is a good way to end up getting yourself sued every time. And he's not wrong. Because that actually would count as defamation of character, as well as tortious interference, because of any loss of opportunity that ends up happening because of, the attempt of a falsely portrayed